Alright, YouTube, so we are back, of course, to talk about some Final Fantasy VII Remake, and also Before Crisis, which is very weird. We don't often talk about this. We've definitely referenced it and discussed it in other videos, but we haven't really done a video that's somewhat dedicated to Before Crisis in some sort of way, and this was an interesting observation I seen on Reddit just a couple days back that I wanted to talk about. So what we have here is the characters, if you want to call them that, of Zirconiade from Before Crisis and the Whisper Harbinger in Remake, being very, very similar to the point that it either has to be some sort of like subtle Easter egg or some sort of like homage to Before Crisis. Shout out to Enzo on the Remake subreddit for noticing this, and now that I say his name out loud, I believe we've actually referenced one of his posts before. So I'm just going to read over what they say really quickly. This is something that only hit me today. Don't worry, I'm not proposing something that's silly like they're the same, but I think when you consider the similarities, it does point to Harbinger also being a weapon/summon of the planet. Quick recap on Zirconiade. Summon of the planet whose purpose is to destroy all life, returning it to the live stream, very similar to Chaos. Zirconiade is summoned in its own dimension, which I think is very important. This dimension manifests into the real world in the appearance of a sphere just above Midgar. The Turks entered this dimension to fight FF7 and in turn Zirconiade itself. Upon defeating Zirconiade, it breaks down and it and its dimension explodes, sending a shockwave in all directions. This explosion damages the unfinished Sector 6. The shadow particles left from this Zirconiade/dimension explosion fall slowly everywhere, reaching Eris in Sector 5, who thinks it's some oddly bright snow. So without me even diving into it, without me even recapping the ending of Remake, does all that not sound insanely familiar to like the last chapter of Remake? Like that's like almost beat for beat exactly what happens with the Whisper Harbinger. We fight the Whisper Harbinger while floating up above Midgar. Obviously, the Whisper Harbinger resides within its own dimension, the Singularity. We follow Sephiroth in there to fight him, but then we are forced to kind of fight Whisper Harbinger, but more so like the three Whispers and also Whisper Bahamut. And of course, defeating the Whispers causes a massive explosion, as we've seen with the end of Remake, which then has like light particles falling down from the sky. It's going to give you the visual comparison when it comes to Before Crisis and Zirconiade. Here at the end of the game, we are in a different dimension. That dimension is up above Midgar. Defeating Zirconiade, of course, leads to an explosion that sends out a massive shockwave similar to the Whispers, which then has particles falling from the sky, which Aerith just questions if it's snow. Now, the kind of comparison of Whisper Harbinger being something like a weapon monster similar to Zirconiade and Diamond Weapon and all of them, that one I think is not even like a speculation or like a stretch to even say, because we know that the Whispers are created by the planet to kind of keep Destiny and Fate in line. They're different because they have to deal with like time and shit like that, but they're still a creation of the planet similar to the weapon monster. So that one I think is kind of goes without saying in a way. Something else that was pointed out on the Reddit post like thread that the OP didn't even notice or mention is that both of these take place at the end of the Midgar like highway or expressway. So as for what all of this comparisons and stuff means, I have no goddamn idea. Enzo has like a couple of ideas, and I don't agree with either of them. One of them being that, with the similarities of them being like weapon type enemies and stuff like that, and that Zirconiade needed like a human sacrifice, which was FF7, that maybe like that's what happened to Genesis after Dirge's Cerberus whenever he like flies off into the sky. Somehow he became the Whisper Harbinger. That's a reach if I've ever seen one. And the other one being that the explosion we see at the end of the game with like Zack is a bit of misdirection, because that happens like a couple weeks before the Zirconiade fight. So maybe with like Remake, what we're seeing there is actually the Zirconiade explosion instead of the Whispers actually exploding. Now, I do think the second one is the most likely out of the two if I had to pick one, but I just don't know that they're going to do that level of misdirection. I think there is a bit of misdirection with that ending sequence. We talked about it enough. I'm not going to go into it here. But to make us think that we're seeing the Whispers like defeated and explode at the end of the game, but it ends up just being the defeat of Zirconiade, like, man, I don't know about all that. That being said, however, there's something interesting with the Whispers that I noticed while, making this video and kind of looking back at that whole ending segment, like the fights and the cutscenes and stuff like that I do want to discuss that could add a little bit of credibility to this, but I want that to be its own dedicated video. I don't want to like put it right here randomly near the end of this video. Now, that's my thoughts on this. I don't think that there's necessarily any like underlying message here for what all this means, the comparisons between the two. I think it's probably just some sort of like subtle Easter egg or some sort of homage to Before Crisis. There's far too many similarities between the two ending segments for not to be at the very least like an Easter egg or some sort of like subtle reference for like the diehard fans to pick up on. Other than that, I don't think it like means anything. I don't think like the Whisper Harbinger is randomly Genesis or some shit like that. If that's the case, goddamn, nobody wants that. Similar to how we have other references in Remake to like some of the other FF7 works, like the three Whispers we fight at the end of the game are, of course, the Advent Children characters. The like throwaway like G-type soldier line, which is of course the reference like Crisis Core and like Angeal and Genesis. To me, it just feels like a bit of a wink and a nudge to those players that have played Before Crisis that might pick up on this. And this is the only person, Enzo is like the only person I've ever seen even mention this or talk about it or notice this. But again, I think there's too many similarities for it not to be something. Whether or not that is, it has any sort of meaning or just an Easter egg, I guess that remains to be seen. But of course, what I do is I want to pass off to you guys in the comment section. What are your thoughts on this? Is it something that you even would have noticed? And what do you think it is? Does it have any sort of meaning, or is it just like that kind of subtle little hint at, hey, here's you some Before Crisis reference? Or, I suppose we've got to ask this question too, is it just like an insane amount of coincidence? Like maybe they thought it was an original idea or concept for remake, forgetting about that random-ass mobile game they made damn near fucking 20 years ago? Either way, leave your thoughts in the comment section below. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you guys are new. What's today? More Final Fantasy VII Remake content. Turn on my notifications. Follow me on Twitter at dashingdavidYT. I'm a Discord. The links to most of those networks are in the description and in the outro. Later, guys.
Used to care what people thought, but now I care more, and nobody out here's got it figured out. So therefore, I've lost all hope of a happy ending, depending on whether or not it's worth it. So insecure, no one's perfect. We spend it with no shame. We blow that like Coltrane. We in here like Rogaine, or leave it like Cobain.